The year was 2487, and humanity had been a prisoner in its own solar system for exactly 300 years. Ambassador Linda Grant had signed the treaty back in 2187. When the Galaxy Council first arrived in Earth's orbit, with a fleet so massive it blocked out the sun, she had been given no choice. Humanity had barely learned to walk among the stars. And now they faced beings who had conquered galaxies before humans had discovered fire. The terms were simple and cruel. Humanity would stay within the soul boundary. They would not expand. They would not develop weapons. They would submit to inspections. And they would be grateful for the privilege of existing at all. 3 centuries had passed since that day of shame, and humanity had obeyed every rule, followed every order, and smiled through every humiliation. But beneath the surface, in places the Council's sensors could not reach, something else had been growing. Something patient. Something angry. Admiral Samuel Price stood on the observation deck of Earth Defense Station Alpha, watching the Council inspection fleet drop out of hyperspace. 12 Velnoxy cruisers, each one a mountain of crystalline metal and ancient technology. Each one capable of destroying everything humanity had built. He had watched these ships arrive quarterly for his entire career. He had learned to hate them with a quiet, burning intensity that never showed on his face. General Patricia Cole walked up beside him, her boots clicking on the metal floor. She was a small woman with gray hair and cold eyes, and she had commanded Earth's ground forces for 15 years. In her hands, she held a tablet showing the quarterly submission reports that the Council demanded. "They are early again," she said, her voice flat. "They are always early when they want something from us," Samuel replied without looking away from the viewport. The Velnoxy were the oldest and most powerful species in the Galaxy Council. Their bodies were made of living crystal, beautiful and terrible to look upon. They did not breathe. They did not eat. They simply existed, ancient beyond human understanding. And they saw younger species as tools to be used or problems to be eliminated. The High Inspector materialized on the observation deck without warning. Its crystalline form catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. Teleportation technology that humanity was forbidden to research. Another reminder of how small they were. "Admiral Price," the inspector said. Its voice was like wind chimes made of broken glass. "We have detected unusual energy signatures from your moon colony. You will explain." Samuel kept his face perfectly still. He had practiced this expression in the mirror for 30 years. "Agricultural Research High Inspector, our new hydroponic systems require significant power to operate efficiently. You will provide complete access to the facility for our inspection teams." "Of course, High Inspector. We have nothing to hide." This was a lie. Humanity had everything to hide, deep beneath the surface of Luna. In a bunker that did not exist on any official record. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day Linda Grant signed away their freedom. The bunker was called Prometheus Station, named after the Titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind. Dr. Howard Kim had spent his entire life there, as had his father and his father before him. 3 generations of scientists, working in secret, building weapons that should not exist. The inspection lasted 6 hours. The Velnoxy teams swept through every human facility, scanning for anything forbidden. They found nothing, because humanity had learned long ago how to hide from gods. But something was different this time. Samuel could feel it in the way the High Inspector moved, in the tone of its harmonic voice. The Council had not come just to inspect. They had come to take. The emergency session of the United Earth Parliament was called that same night. Representatives from every human colony gathered in the great chamber beneath the Atlantic Ocean, faces grim on the holographic displays. Speaker Daniel Wright stood at the podium, his knuckles white as he gripped the edges. The High Inspector floated at the center of the chamber, its crystalline body rotating slowly. It did not sit. The Velnoxy never sat. "Humanity has been found in violation of Treaty Article 7, the inspector announced. "Unauthorized population growth beyond permitted parameters." Daniel Wright's voice shook slightly as he responded. "Our population growth has been within treaty limits for over a century. We have followed every regulation precisely. The Council has revised the permitted parameters. The revision is retroactive. Your current population now exceeds the limit by 43%. Silence fell across the chamber. Every human present understood what those words meant. Retroactive revision was a legal fiction, a tool the Council used whenever they wanted something they had no right to demand. What does the Council require? Daniel asked. He already knew the answer would be terrible. 43% of your population will be relocated to Council labor colonies. You have 90 planetary rotations to compile compliance lists. The Council will select which individuals are to be relocated. Resistance will be met with species-level consequences. 4 billion people, taken from their homes, sent to work in Velnoxy mines, Kreth factories, or the breeding pens of the Morthax. Humanity would be hollowed out, reduced to a shell of itself, and there would be nothing they could do to stop it. The High Inspector vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the Parliament in chaos. Representatives screamed at each other. Diplomats wept openly. Military officers sat in rigid silence, their faces masks of barely controlled rage. But in a secure bunker, 3 kilometers below the Parliament building, a different conversation was happening. Admiral Samuel Price sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by 50 of humanity's most brilliant minds and hardest soldiers. General Patricia Cole sat to his right. Dr. Howard Kim sat to his left, his fingers dancing across a holographic display that showed 200 years of secret development. "It is time," Samuel said simply. "Are we ready?" Patricia asked. Howard pulled up the full specifications of Project Prometheus. Weapons systems that used physics the Council thought impossible. Shield technology reverse-engineered from captured Velnoxy probes. Engine designs that broke every law the Council had imposed. Ships that had been built in secret, hidden in the depths of gas giants and the hearts of asteroids. "We have been ready for 50 years, Howard said. "The question was never whether we could fight. The question was whether we would choose to." Samuel looked around the table at the faces of his fellow conspirators. These were people who had dedicated their entire lives to this moment. They had sacrificed everything, knowing they might never see the results of their work. "The Council has taken our freedom," Samuel said. "They have taken our dignity. They have taken our future. Now they want our children, our families, our very souls. I say we give them something else instead. I say we show them why their ancestors were right to fear us." He stood and placed his hand on the table, palm down. "Who stands with me?" One by one, every person in the room stood. One by one, they placed their hands on the table. The vote was unanimous. Humanity had been pushed too far. The boundary had been crossed, and somewhere in the darkness of space, a sleeping giant began to open its eyes. The galaxy would never be the same. The 30 days passed quickly, and humanity used every single hour in the public eye. Speaker Daniel Wright led endless negotiations with the Council representatives. He begged. He pleaded. He offered compromises that he knew would be rejected. The Council watched these performances with cold amusement, certain that humanity would break and comply as every other species had done before them. They had no idea what was happening in the shadows. Admiral Samuel Price had not slept more than 3 hours a night since the Council's demand. He spent his days in the hidden command center beneath Luna, coordinating the largest military mobilization in human history. Ships that had been sleeping in the darkness for decades were waking up. Crews that had trained in secret for their entire lives were taking their positions. Weapons that should not exist were being armed and aimed at the stars. General Patricia Cole handled the ground preparations. On every human colony, in every city and settlement, weapons caches were being opened. Defense systems were being activated. Civilians were being quietly moved to shelters that the Council did not know existed. Humanity was preparing for war. They were doing it right under the Council's nose. Dr. Howard Kim worked without rest in Prometheus Station, running final checks on the technology that would give humanity a fighting chance. His great-grandfather had started this work. His grandfather had continued it. His father had refined it. And now, Howard would see it used. The quantum shields are operating at full capacity. He he reported to Samuel during one of their encrypted calls. "The kinetic accelerators are charged. The fleet is ready. How many ships do we have?" Samuel asked. 3,742 combat vessels, 12 dreadnoughts, 48 carriers. The rest are cruisers, destroyers, and support craft. It was not enough. The Council commanded millions of ships, but humanity had something the Council did not expect. They had spent 3 centuries learning their enemies' weaknesses. They had studied every piece of Council technology they could get their hands on, and they had built weapons specifically designed to kill gods. The 30th day arrived. The Council's deadline had come. Speaker Daniel Wright stood before the United Earth Parliament one final time. The High Inspector floated beside him, waiting for humanity's surrender. Every representative was present, their faces carefully blank. They all knew what was about to happen. "High Inspector," Daniel said, his voice steady for the first time in 30 days. "I have consulted with my government. We have reached a decision." "You will provide the compliance lists," the inspector said. It was not a question. No. A single word echoed through the chamber. The High Inspector's crystalline form flickered with what might have been surprise. "Explain," it demanded. Daniel smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Humanity formally rejects your demands. We withdraw from all treaties signed under duress. We declare our sovereignty over the Sol system and all territories we choose to claim. Any vessel entering our space without invitation will be destroyed." The inspector's voice rose to a painful frequency. "This is unacceptable. The Council will respond with force. Your species will be erased from existence." "You are welcome to try," Daniel said, "but I would suggest you leave now while you still can." The inspector vanished, teleporting back to its fleet. Alarms began screaming throughout the chamber. The Council was coming, but they were already too late. Admiral Samuel Price stood on the bridge of the dreadnought, wakening as it rose from its hiding place within Jupiter's atmosphere. The ship was 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that had taken a century to design. It was humanity's flagship, and Samuel had waited his entire life to command it. "All ships report status," he ordered. Across the solar system, voices responded. Captain Laura Bennett on the carrier Defiance. Commander Gregory Nash on the cruiser Vengeance. Commander Rachel Torres on the destroyer Swift Justice. Thousands of voices, thousands of ships, all of them ready to fight. "The Council fleet is entering Sol space," the tactical officer reported. 2,000 Velnoxy warships. Standard pacification formation. Samuel watched the enemy ships appear on his display, each one a glowing red dot. 2,000 ships. The Velnoxy expected this to be easy. They expected humanity to fold like every other young species before them. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "All ships. Engage," Samuel ordered. Humanity's fleet emerged from hiding places across the solar system, from behind Jupiter's moons, from within the asteroid belt, from the dark side of Luna and the cloud-covered surface of Venus. 3,000 ships, appearing all at once, surrounding the Council fleet like wolves around a wounded deer. The Velnoxy had never seen human weapons in action. They relied on their crystalline shields, which had protected them for 10,000 years. They relied on their energy weapons, which had burned 100 species to ash. They did not understand what they were facing, Captain. Laura Bennett commanded the first wave. Her carrier launched 500 fighter craft, each one armed with kinetic missiles designed specifically to shatter crystalline armor. She watched on her display as the missiles struck home, and she watched the Velnoxy shields fail. "Their shields are down," she reported, her voice calm and professional. "All batteries fire at will." The human fleet opened up with everything they had. Kinetic accelerators hurled tungsten projectiles at near-light speed. Plasma lances cut through crystalline holes like hot knives through butter. Nuclear warheads detonated against engine sections. Turning enemy ships into expanding clouds of debris, the Velnoxy tried to respond. Their energy weapons lashed out, trying to find targets. But humanity had studied those weapons for 3 centuries. The quantum shields absorbed the energy, converted it, and fed it back into the human weapons systems. In 17 minutes, The Valnoxi Second Fleet lost 800 ships, High Commander. Had conquered 11 species in her 400 years of life. She had never known defeat. She had never known fear. But as she watched her fleet die around her, she felt something cold growing in her crystalline heart. Send a message to the Council homeworld, she ordered her communications officer. Tell them we need reinforcements. Tell them to send everyone. These humans, they were hiding everything. They were hiding everything. Her flagship shuddered as a kinetic round punched through the bridge. The last thing Vextal saw was the human dreadnought awakening. Its guns still firing, coming straight for her. Then there was only light. On Earth, the population watched the battle unfold on their screens. They watched the Council fleet burn. They watched their ships they never knew existed, fighting and winning against an enemy that had ruled the galaxy for 100,000 years. For the first time in 3 centuries, humanity began to hope. But Admiral Samuel Price knew this was only the beginning. The Council would respond with overwhelming force. They would send every ship they had. The real war was just starting. He looked at his crew, at the determined faces of men and women who had waited their whole lives for this moment. And he allowed himself a small smile. Well done, he said. Now, let us show them what else we have been hiding. The galaxy had tried to keep humanity in a cage. The cage was now broken, and the beast was free. The Council's response was exactly what Admiral Samuel Price had expected. Within 72 hours of the destruction of the Second Fleet, every major Council species mobilized for war. The Valnoxi hegemony sent 15 fleets from their core worlds. The Kreth Dominion dispatched their dreaded Black Armada, ships that had never known defeat in 6,000 years. The Morthax Collective, the Zalian Empire, the Thornweld Syndicate, all of them, sent everything they could spare. 50,000 warships converged on the Sol system, an armada so vast that their engine signatures could be detected from 100 light-years away. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, all of it aimed at one small species that had dared to say no. The Galaxy Council made one final offer before the attack. Surrender unconditionally, they said. Give up your leaders for public execution. Reduce your population to 1 billion. Destroy all weapons. Accept permanent Council occupation. Do this, and some of you may live. Speaker Daniel Wright's response was broadcast across every human colony. 300 years ago, we were forced to kneel because we had no choice. Today, we choose to stand. Whatever comes next, we face it together. We face it as humans. The first Council fleets arrived at the edge of Sol space on the morning of June 15th, 2488. Admiral Samuel Price watched them come from the bridge of the Awakening, his face calm as the tactical displays filled with red markers. 53,000 enemy vessels confirmed, the tactical officer reported. They are spreading into a containment formation. They mean to trap us in the system and destroy us piece by piece. Good, Samuel said. Let them spread out. It makes them easier to hunt. The Council's strategy was simple and brutal. Overwhelm humanity with numbers. Sacrifice as many ships as necessary. Grind the human fleet down until nothing remained. It was a strategy that had worked against every enemy the Council had ever faced. But humanity had not spent 3 centuries preparing just to meet the Council ship for ship. They had something else entirely in mind. General Patricia Cole commanded the defense platforms, scattered throughout the system. Hidden in asteroids, buried on moons, floating in the rings of Saturn. These weapons platforms had been building up power for decades. Each one contained a directed energy weapon based on technology humanity had stolen from the Valnoxi themselves. Modified and improved beyond anything the original designers had imagined. Admiral, the platforms are charged and ready, Patricia reported. Fire on my mark, Samuel replied. The Council fleets pushed deeper into Sol space, their commanders confident in their overwhelming numbers. They had already dismissed humanity's earlier victory as a fluke, a lucky ambush that could not be repeated. They would soon learn otherwise, Samuel said quietly. 147 defense platforms fired simultaneously. Beams of concentrated energy, each one capable of cutting through a mountain, lashed out across the system. The Council's outer formation disintegrated in seconds. Ships that had survived 1,000 battles vanished in flashes of light so bright they could be seen from Earth with the naked eye. The Council fleet scattered in confusion, trying to regroup. But as they maneuvered, they flew directly into the minefields humanity had laid decades earlier. Smart mines, designed to recognize Council engine signatures, activated and pursued their targets with patient determination. Thousands more ships died before the Council commanders understood what was happening. Admiral Price pressed the advantage. His fleet emerged from defensive positions around Earth and Luna, driving into the heart of the Council formation. The Dreadnought Awakening led the charge, its weapons never stopping, its shields absorbing everything the enemy threw at it. Captain Laura Bennett's carrier group flanked the Velnoxy contingent, cutting off their retreat. Commander Gregory Nash led his cruiser squadron against the Kreth Black Armada, matching their infamous warriors blow for blow. Commander Rachel Torres and her destroyers hunted down the smaller Council vessels, denying them any chance to regroup. The battle raged for 3 days without pause. Human crews fought in shifts, rotating through combat stations to maintain constant pressure. The Council forces, accustomed to quick victories, against weaker opponents, began to crack under the sustained assault. On the second day, the Kreth flagship was boarded by human marines. General Cole led the assault personally, fighting her way through corridors designed for beings twice her size. The Kreth were fearsome warriors, their bodies armored with natural bone plates, their claws capable of shredding steel. But humanity had learned how to fight them too. Patricia found the Kreth High Commander in his throne room, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guard. He was wounded, but still fighting, his massive form covered in blood, both alien and human. "You cannot win," the Kreth snarled. "Even if you destroy this fleet, the Council will send more. They will never stop." Patricia raised her rifle. "We know. That is why we are not just going to win this battle. We are going to win the war." She shot him between his 4 eyes and moved on. By the end of the 3rd day, the Council Armada had been reduced to less than 10,000 ships. Those that survived fled back to Council space, carrying tales of the human monsters who fought without fear, who died without surrendering, who simply refused to be conquered. Admiral Samuel Price surveyed the wreckage scattered across the solar system. Millions of Council soldiers were dead. Thousands of their greatest ships were nothing but debris. Humanity had lost ships too, lost good people, but they had won. "Sir," the communications officer said, "we are receiving a transmission from the Velnoxy High Council. They are demanding our immediate surrender." Samuel laughed. It was a sound that carried through the bridge, and his crew laughed with him. "Tell them we have a counteroffer," he said. "We are coming for them. Every world they control, every species they have enslaved. We are coming to set them all free, and nothing in this galaxy is going to stop us." The message was sent. The war would continue. But humanity was no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting for liberation. Dr. Howard. Kim joined Samuel on the observation deck after the battle. They stood together in silence, watching the cleanup operations begin. Rescue ships were recovering survivors, both human and alien. Medical vessels were treating the wounded regardless of species. Humanity would not become the monsters they had defeated. "What happens now?" Howard asked. Samuel looked at the stars, at the vast darkness filled with countless worlds, countless species still under the Council's boot. "Now we take the fight to them," Samuel said. "The Council thought they could keep the galaxy afraid forever. They were wrong. We are going to show every enslaved species out there that freedom is possible. And we are going to burn the Council's empire to the ground." The sleeping giant had awakened, and it was angry. The Council had ruled the galaxy through one simple principle: keep the subject species separated. Keep them weak. Keep them afraid of each other. Never let them realize that together they could tear the empire apart. But humanity had spent 3 centuries watching and learning. They had seen the Council's cruelty from the inside. They had seen the mining colonies where entire species worked themselves to death for Velnoxy profit. They had seen the factory worlds where children were born into slavery and died without ever seeing the sky, and they had made plans. Admiral Samuel Price stood before the War Council, a holographic map of the galaxy floating before him. Red dots marked Council strongholds. Blue dots marked the worlds where humanity had been quietly building alliances for generations. "The Council expects us to defend Sol and wait for their next attack," Samuel said. "We are going to do the opposite. We are going to take the war to them, and we are going to do it everywhere at once." The plan was called Operation Prometheus, named after the secret project that had given humanity its weapons. It was the largest coordinated military operation in galactic history, and it relied on something the Council had never expected. Humanity was not alone. On the mining world of Axiom 7, deep in Kreth territory, a species called the Velthari had been enslaved for 4,000 years. They were small beings, barely a meter tall, with 4 arms and brilliant minds for engineering. The Council used them to dig minerals from poisonous underground tunnels, and most of them died before reaching adulthood. But for the past 50 years, human agents had been making contact with the Velthari resistance. They had smuggled in weapons, medicine, and information. They had trained fighters. They had made promises that humanity intended to keep. When the signal came, the Velthari rose. Linda Hayes was a human operative who had lived among the Velthari for 20 years. She had learned their language, shared their food, mourned their dead. Now she fought beside them as they stormed the Kreth garrison. "The orbital defense grid is ours," she reported to Admiral Price from the command center they had captured. "Axiom 7 is free. Excellent work, Agent Hayes. Hold position. Reinforcements are on the way." Similar stories played out across the galaxy. On the agricultural world of Harvest Prime, human-designed computer viruses attacked the Velnoxy control systems. The crystalline overseers found themselves blind and deaf as the slaves they had brutalized for centuries finally struck back. On the factory moon of Thornweld Station, human marines joined forces with a species called the Goroth, massive beings who had been forced to build weapons for their masters. Together, they seized the production facilities and turned the weapons against the Council forces sent to stop them. On 100 other worlds, the fire of rebellion spread. Species that had never dared to hope began to fight. Species that had been taught to hate each other joined forces against their common enemy. The Council's empire, which had stood for 100,000 years, began to crumble from within. General Patricia Cole led the assault on the Velnoxy shipyards at Crystalline Station. It was the largest and oldest production facility in Council space, responsible for building warships for 10 millennia. Destroying it would cripple the Council's ability to replace their losses. The battle was brutal. The Velnoxy defended their sacred shipyards with everything they had. Energy weapons lit up the darkness between the stars. Crystalline fighters swarmed around the human fleet like angry insects. For 72 hours, the outcome hung in the balance. But Patricia had not come to lose. "All Marine divisions, prepare for boarding operations," she ordered from her command ship. "We are going to take that station piece by piece if we have to." The human Marines launched in assault pods, crossing the deadly gap between the fleets, while weapons fire filled the space around them. Many pods were destroyed before reaching the station. The soldiers inside died without ever firing a shot, but enough got through. Patricia led the assault on the command center personally. Her power armor was scarred by a dozen near misses. Her helmet visor was cracked. But she kept fighting, kept pushing forward. Step by bloody step, the Velnoxy commanders made their last stand in the central control room, surrounded by crystalline walls that had stood for thousands of years. They were ancient beings, survivors of wars that humanity had never heard of. They had never imagined that they could fall to such young creatures. Patricia walked through the door, her rifle raised. Behind her came the survivors of her Marine division, men and women who had fought through kilometers of corridors to reach this moment. "Your empire is finished," Patricia told the Velnoxy. "Surrender, and you will be treated fairly. Fight, and you will die." The eldest Velnoxy, a being of deep blue crystal who had lived for 30,000 years, raised his weapon arm. "Do not surrender to insects," he said. Patricia shot him before he could fire. The others followed moments later. "Crystalline Station is ours," she reported to Admiral Price. "Beginning demolition." The shipyards burned for a month. The light of their destruction could be seen from a dozen star systems. A beacon telling the galaxy that the Council's power was broken. But the war was not without cost. Earth itself came under attack when a Kreth suicide fleet broke through the defense grid. 17 million people died when kinetic weapons struck the coastal cities of 3 continents. Luna Colony had to be evacuated when Velnixi infiltrators sabotaged the atmospheric processors. Captain Laura Bennett died when her carrier was destroyed, covering the retreat of a refugee convoy. Admiral Samuel Price attended her memorial service, standing among the grieving crew of the Defiance. He spoke of her courage, her sacrifice, her unwavering belief that humanity was fighting for something worth dying for. "Captain Bennett knew the cost of freedom," Samuel said. "She paid that cost willingly so that others would not have to. We honor her by continuing the fight. We honor her by winning." The war entered its 3rd year, then its 4th, then its 5th. The Council threw everything they had at the growing alliance of free species, and every time they were pushed back. World after world fell from their control. Species after species joined the rebellion. By the 7th year, the Council's territory had shrunk to a handful of core systems. Their fleets were shadows of their former strength. Their armies were exhausted. Their subject species were gone, either freed or fighting for their freedom. Dr. Howard Kim, still working from Prometheus Station, sent a message to Admiral Price. "They are ready to surrender," Howard said. "The Council has requested terms." Samuel stood on the bridge of the Awakening, the same ship he had commanded since the war began. It was battered now, its hull scarred by 100 battles. But it was still flying. It had carried humanity from slavery to victory. "Tell them we will accept unconditional surrender," Samuel said. Nothing less. The galaxy had been a prison for 100,000 years. The Council had believed their empire would last forever. They had been wrong. Humanity had lit a fire that could not be put out. And now the entire galaxy was burning bright with freedom. The Treaty of Centauri was signed aboard the Dreadnought Awakening. In the same conference room where Admiral Samuel Price had planned humanity's first strike against the Council 7 years earlier, the room was crowded now. Representatives from 47 species filled the seats that had once held only human conspirators. Velnoxi survivors stood in chains along the walls, their crystalline bodies dim with defeat. Kreth War leaders knelt before the species they had once enslaved. The masters of the galaxy had become its prisoners. Samuel stood at the head of the table, older than he had been when this all started. Grayer and more tired, but still unbowed. General Patricia Cole stood at his right hand. Her uniform decorated with medals from a dozen campaigns, Dr. Howard Kim stood at his left, the quiet architect of humanity's impossible victory. "You are dissolved," Samuel told the assembled council representatives. His voice was firm but not cruel. This was justice, not revenge. "Your empires are dismantled. Your slave populations are freed. Your weapons are confiscated. And you will face trial for your crimes against the species of this galaxy." The Velnoxi High Arbiter, last surviving member of the Council's inner circle, raised his crystalline head. He was ancient beyond measure, and he had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations that humanity had never heard of. But he had never witnessed anything like this. "You cannot maintain order without us," he said. "We held this galaxy together for 100,000 years. Without our structure, without our control, chaos will consume everything. You have doomed countless worlds to destruction." Samuel looked at the alien being who had once commanded the power of 1,000 suns. He felt no hatred now, only a tired sadness for all the suffering this creature and his kind had caused. "Your order was built on chains," Samuel replied. "Your peace was purchased with blood. You kept the galaxy quiet by crushing any species that dared to dream of freedom. That is not order. That is tyranny. And tyranny, no matter how old, eventually falls." The Arbiter was silent. He had no answer for that. "We offer something different," Samuel continued. Not another empire, not another set of masters. We offer partnership. We offer choice. We offer the chance for every species to determine its own fate. The treaty was signed by representatives of every species present. Humanity did not claim any special authority over the new order. They had not fought this war to replace one empire with another. They had fought to set the galaxy free. The years that followed were not easy. The council's fall left. Power vacuums across the galaxy. Some worlds descended into civil war as former slaves settled scores with their former masters. Some species, conditioned by centuries of servitude, struggled to govern themselves. Some former council worlds tried to rebuild their power only to be stopped by the new alliance that humanity had helped create, the Free Worlds. Alliance was born from the ashes of the council's empire. It was not a government in the traditional sense. Each member species retained full sovereignty over its own affairs. What bound them together was a simple set of principles that humanity had insisted upon from the beginning. No slavery. No conquest. No forced compliance. Every species was free to chart its own course. As long as they respected the freedom of others, Representative Carol Grant addressed the first full session of the Alliance. Parliament. Held on a space station constructed in the neutral zone between former council territories, she was the great-great-granddaughter of Linda Grant, ambassador who had signed away humanity's freedom 3 centuries earlier. It seemed fitting that her descendant would help build something better. 300 years ago, my ancestor made a choice that haunted her for the rest of her life, Carol said. She signed a treaty that made humanity slaves because she believed we had no other option. She died believing that she had doomed her species to eternal subjugation. Carol paused, looking out at the assembled representatives. Valnoxy, who had chosen peace over war, Kreth, who had renounced conquest, Velthri, who had risen from the mines to become engineers and scientists, Goroth, who built hospitals instead of weapons, dozens of other species, each with their own story of suffering and survival. Today we prove that she was wrong, Carol continued. Not because we are stronger, though we proved that we can fight when we must. Not because we are smarter, though we showed that we can outthink any enemy. We are here because when the galaxy tried to break us, we refused to be broken. We remembered who we were, and we never forgot what we could become. The Parliament erupted in applause. It was a sound that echoed through the station, a sound that was carried by broadcast to every world in the Alliance. On the rebuilt Luna colony, Admiral Samuel Price watched the ceremony from his home. He had retired from active service 3 years earlier, his body finally giving out after decades of war. Dr. Howard Kim sat beside him, equally old and equally tired. "We did it," Howard said quietly. "We actually did it," Samuel nodded slowly. He thought of all the people who had died to reach this moment. Captain Laura Bennett, killed defending refugees. The 17 million who died in the attack on Earth, the countless soldiers, human and alien alike, who had given their lives for a freedom they would never see. "They did it," Samuel corrected. "We just lit the spark. They carried the fire." Through the window, they could see the stars. Once, those stars had represented prison walls, boundaries that humanity was forbidden to cross. Now they represented possibility. Every point of light was a world where beings were free to live their own lives, make their own choices, build their own futures. The Free Worlds Alliance grew stronger with each passing year. Former enemies became friends. Former slaves became leaders. The scars of the war slowly healed, placed by new connections and new hopes. Humanity took its place among the stars. It's not as conquerors or rulers, but as partners. They shared their technology freely. They offered their help to any species that asked. They proved that strength did not have to mean dominance. That power did not have to mean cruelty. The Galaxy Council had crossed humanity's boundary. And humanity had responded not with mere survival, but with liberation. Not with vengeance, but with a vision of something better. They had shown that even the oldest and most powerful empire could be brought down by those who refused to accept injustice. On the anniversary of the war's end, a simple ceremony was held at Prometheus Station. The facility that had been humanity's greatest secret was now a museum, open to visitors from across the galaxy. Beings of every species came to see where the rebellion had been born, to understand how a young and seemingly powerless species had found the strength to challenge gods. At the center of the museum stood a statue of Linda Grant, the ambassador who had signed the original treaty. Beneath the statue was a plaque with words that Samuel Price had written himself. We were told to kneel. We were told to accept our place. We were told that resistance was futile. But we remembered something that the council forgot. We remembered that freedom is never given. It must be taken. It must be defended. And it must be shared. The statue looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that was now free. Humanity had been pushed too far. They had snapped. And in snapping, they had broken the chains of an entire galaxy. The stars had never seemed brighter.